Hi there, this is Teri from Stamping Magic. Welcome back to my channel. Today's project is this lovely card. I used the Beach Happy stamp set. The centre panel is watercolour card. I embossed the trees and then I watercoloured the background. I also embossed the sentiment. The paper is from the classic Garage 6-inch stack. So let's get started. I'm going to use 3 of the images from the Beach Happy stamp set, the sentiment, the top of the tree and also the trunk of the tree. I'm going to stamp using my Stamparatus and I've placed my stamp set under the plate to keep it level. I have 2 pieces of the watercolour card, a scrap piece that I'm going to use for the sentiment and then another panel that I've die cut using the rectangle stitched framelit dies. I used the 3rd largest. I'm also using the smaller die to cut out the sentiment. I'm going to start by stamping my sentiment and I'm going to use Bermuda Bay ink and I'm going to stamp this twice because the surface of the watercolour card is not smooth, so you don't always get a good first impression, but it's easy with the Stamparatus to go again and overstamp. I've cleaned off my stamp and I'm now going to stamp the sentiment again using Versamark ink, and I'm going to do this twice as well. Then I'll cover the sentiment with clear embossing powder and just put it to one side for now. I'm now going to stamp the main panel. And because I'm overstamping the edges, I want to anchor this to the centre of my Stamparatus area, and I've just drawn a frame on the grid paper to help me position this, and I'm positioning it with repositionable glue. I'm using my embossing buddy just to remove any static that's on that card that will cause the embossing powder to cling where I don't want it to. Now I'm going to position the first tree and pick it up with my plate, and then I'm going to ink this using Versamark ink, and I'm going to do this 3 times to make sure that there's good coverage. I will then cover it with gold embossing powder and heat it with my heat tool. I'll then do exactly the same for my second tree. I'm now repositioning my panel into the Stamparatus and I'm going to stamp the tree trunks. Now, because this stamp set is photopolymer, you're able to manipulate the stamps to a certain extent. What I'm doing here is trying to determine where I want the base of that trunk to sit, and I'm then going to pick up the stamp with my plate. I can then bend the top of that tree trunk just slightly and position it where I want it to join the top of the tree. I'm going to ink this up using soft suede ink and I'm going to stamp it twice. Then I'm going to carefully clean off my stamp. I don't want to move that image in any way. And then I'm going to ink it up with Versamark and again stamp it twice. Then this time I'm going to cover with clear embossing powder and then use my heat tool to melt it. I'll stamp the second tree trunk in the same way. This one required just a little bit more fiddling to get it positioned correctly. So I'm just determining where the base should go first of all, and then I'm bending that trunk towards the top of the tree and just adjusting it until I'm happy. Then again I'm going to ink it twice using soft suede ink, clean the stamp and ink it twice again using Versamark ink before embossing with clear powder and then heating it until the powder melts with my heat tool. Don't forget to also melt the powder on your sentiment. I then cut out the sentiment using the rectangle stitch die. I'm going to use an aqua painter for watercolouring. Now this holds the water in the barrel and there's also a valve underneath the nib that controls the flow of the water. I'm starting with Sahara Sand ink and I'm just going to squeeze the base of this ink pad to transfer some of the ink into the lid. Now because I'm using watercolour card, I can get this quite wet. You won't get any issues with it pilling or whatever. And I'm just going to create a horizon to start off with and then lightly colour the bottom third of the card. And then when you want to change colours, you just scrub the nib onto some kitchen towel and that will clean it. My next colour is Pool Party, and again I just want to coat the top 2/3 of the card with a light wash of colour. So I'm squeezing my aqua pen to get the water flowing and then I'm picking up my ink and just lightly colouring the top of that card. I'm now going to switch to Crumb Cake ink, again squeezing the bottom of the pad to transfer ink into the lid, and then I'm just going to add a little to the foreground. Then I'm going to switch to soft suede ink and add a little of this as well. The difficulty here is knowing when to stop. It's quite easy to get carried away. I'm just using Bermuda Bay for the sky. And first of all, I'm going to dilute it so it's quite light. So I'm adding a lot of water here. And again, just adding a little to my card, not getting too carried away and covering the whole thing. Then I'm going to pick up some ink from the top half of that lid, which is darker, it's more concentrated, and I'm just going to add a little more to my card to give it some dimension in the sky. I'm going to work on the sentiment panel next, and I have some linen thread and also a piece of burlap ribbon. Now the burlap measures about 8 centimeters or 3 1/8 of an inch long, and all I'm doing here is fraying the edges, and then I'm going to clip some of the threads so they're not all the same length. Just adds a distressed look. I'm then going to add a couple of strips of tear and tape to the back of the sentiment panel, take off the backing, and then stick this onto the burlap ribbon. I'm now going to thread the button with the linen thread and tie it into a knot and then into a tiny little bow. If you find tying a bow this small tricky, then just do a double knot. This button, by the way, comes from the True Gentleman Buttons pack. I can then trim off the ends. I'm going to add dimensionals to the back of this little panel. And then I can position the button just using a mini glue dot. I'm now going to put the card together. I have a card base in soft suede and a mat in Bermuda Bay. I also have a mat from the Classic Garage Designer Series paper. Now I'm going to layer all of these together. For the inside of the card, I have a very vanilla mat, and then I have a scrap of the paper and another scrap of Bermuda Bay card, and I'm just laying the paper onto the card just so there's a border on the top showing, and then I'm going to cut this down and add it to the bottom of the vanilla mat. That can then be positioned inside the card. On my original card, I stuck the image panel straight onto the front of the card base, but this time I'm going to back it with another layer of soft suede. I'm going to position my panel so there's an equal border showing of the Designer Series paper at the top and the sides. So the border at the bottom is just a little bit deeper to allow for the sentiment. I've then removed the dimensional backings from the sentiment panel, and this can be positioned towards the bottom of the card. And there we have it, the card is now complete. And my original card. I think I definitely prefer the newer one. I like the extra white space that I've left on the main panel, and also the addition of the soft suede layer. Which do you prefer? Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this project. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notifications bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. Bye for now.